The biggest buy low going into week 3 is that more this week on the couch. Dwain McFarland here to tell us a lot, including who the number one buy low is for this week.
Yeah, the number one buy low this week. I think this one's so easy. And part of what you have to do when you do this, Sigmund, is you can't just find like the players you like that you think
Right.
are going to get better. Like you also want to kind of go and use some of the tools that are out there and see like what are these players going for? Like are people actually moving them, or are they still holding on and hearkening to no, this player still has this name value that I'm not willing to give up on yet. And that is a different process or a different path that every player must go through. And it's funny how it works. It's not always the players you would think, but my guy's Tank Dell.
Yeah.
Tank Dell is a guy that people are just fed up with, because he's come out here and he scored 8.9 and 2.3 fantasy points, and he's a guy that you saw blasting off last year and just putting up these huge box scores. And you know how people get it can be frustrating when you have a player like that perform that way out of the gate. Also, Tank Dell in your home leagues was not someone that people spent a really high pick on. So people are not clinging on to that. Well, I spent a second or a third round pick. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like in home leagues, this guy was going in 5, 6 in those rounds. Like my son got him in round 7 of his ESPN draft. So people also more willing to let go of an asset like that. But here's the big thing. If you were to tell me Tank Dell was averaging 5.6 fantasy points after 2 weeks in the season, and you asked me to predict like what would be the problem, I would predict that the problem would be that Bobby Slowick decided he wanted to run a lot of heavy formation stuff, and he got squeezed off the field and was only out there in 11 personnel. Well, guess what? That's not what's happened. They're actually using 11 personnel when they throw the ball 79% of the time. When they drop back to pass for the Texans, they are using 3 wide receiver sets, Sig, and they rotate their guys on the other 2 downs. So you would think when you see Nico Collins in a clear lead that he would just be at like a 95% route participation and Tank Dell might be at 70%. That's not the case. Nico's at 88% of the time. He's on the field when they throw the ball. Tank Dell, 86%. Stephon Diggs, 87. So they're all 3 playing. And all I can tell you is I love Nico Collins. I think he's a great player, but there's no way he finishes the year 60 spots different from Tank Dell and the fantasy finishes. Like it's not happening. Like these two are going to come much closer together. I still think Nico Collins is a wide receiver 1. I don't think he'll be the wide receiver 2 overall. I think he's a great player, but I think Tank Dell could still be a wide receiver 2 overall. And he's the wide receiver 60, maybe even lower after the Monday night game, but he's way down the ranks is the point. And people are not completely tied to this guy. So that is the perfect combination. And of course, Sig, we love the Texans. We want to buy into an offense that we think we get it. Passing is down, but like the Texans are still one of these teams that can throw for 300 yards per game, right? And they can actually support all of these weapons. Are they all going to feast every week? No, but at the end of the year, you're going to feel really good about having Texans weapons on your fantasy football team.
Tank Dell's fun, like you said. Dwain McFarland, author, inventor of the utilization report, over find it at Fantasy Life. But yeah, they're using him. Like you said, the problem is that they're not using him. They're using him. He's good. I think we're pretty sure that he's good at football. And
target shares can just be random over small samples, guys.
Yeah.
We know this guy's a target earner. He already showed us last year. He's a big playmaker. In fact, he's 1 catch last weekend, Sig, from you not being able to buy low on him.
Right.
So that's the other kind of thing you got to look at.
Stride.
Yes.
Yeah. There was one that he could have housed from, I don't know what it was, 60, 70 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, when he, and what you like about that is he's the kind of player when he makes plays, they're plays that win your week for you. So yeah, it's just the Texans offense in general. I mean, as we look over week 3.
What if he ever found himself for a 2 or 3 week stretch? We don't like players to get hurt.
Of course.
We've seen what happens in this league. Like everyone knows right now. I mean, with the massacre that we've seen over the first 2 weeks of the season to fantasy lineups, but at any point, and doesn't have to be for the season. Stephon Diggs misses 2 or 3 games. Nico misses a game or 2. Tank Dell's got a potential to be a wide receiver 1, right? So I mean, there's just so many paths that this guy just completely destroying where he's currently sitting.
Yeah, I like that you brought up contingent upside. We bring up contingent upside for our end of the draft picks, but we don't often talk about contingent upside for players we're taking in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds, but it's there. And what makes Tank Dell's contingent upside more durable is they have a good enough offense that there are some offenses what you could say, oh, we take away this player, redistribute the targets or the carries or whatever. Well, no, take away this player and this offense is not going to be as good. So it's going to balance out. But we saw CJ Stroud can cook with Dell and Collins just fine. So yeah, I mean, Tank Dell's a really fun guy to have. And what you're looking for is, well, two elements, like you said. And I think this is important. I want to pause and really let this breathe. Okay. A very underrated fantasy football skill. And this is when it comes into play when we're getting into the hot trade season, is understanding what other people think. I know what I think, right? I mean, Dwayne, you know what you think, but paying attention and understanding, like you said, what are the perception of other people of this player? That is where the rubber meets the road and actually being able to make trades. And then the other part of it is, well, and this is where Adam Harstad, who look at the big brain on Adam Harstad, who,
Oh yeah.
he's everything. It's simple. I mean, I wonder if life is boring
So
for
big you
Adam.
can't even view it. You need a movie
Right,
theater. Like
exactly. We
it's
need a widescreen. Exactly.
and you need to sit in the back row because it's going to take up the whole screen.
Absolutely. Every week and every year, he reminds us that the first 4 weeks of the season, ADP is still a better predictor than the year-to-date points of the current season. So what we're talking about is, we have a certain number of players that are overperforming ADP and a certain number of players that are underperforming ADP. Now, some of them is, well, on the big reveal, they're going to be better or worse than we thought, or their offenses are going to be better or worse. So like you said, their role is different than we envisioned. But some of them, it's just the first couple weeks of the season. There's injuries. There's, hey, 3 weeks of preseason, the stars barely play.
There's
There's new,
variance.
right? There's
Just
variance, good old
variance. Just plain
variance,
old
and
variance.
then there's just also, like, the Ravens offense. They're going to get better. Their blocking's going to get. I mean, you can just watch it and say, like, this isn't what we're going to see 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, as some of these issues get ironed out. I don't know that the Texans' offense has had issues. Chicago's a good defense, and things went pretty well against Indianapolis, and we'll see against Minnesota. Minnesota, what a great matchup this weekend.
Yeah.
We might have to pause, and maybe the real buy low will be one more week because Minnesota's defense is pretty good. Although Brock Purdy put up a lot of numbers against them last week, so I wouldn't wait to get Tank Dell. Now, on the other side of what people are thinking, and I really wanted to highlight this one from your column this week, Dwayne, because I'd love it when you say, I know the utilization score says Rhamondre Stevenson's awesome, but I'm telling you to sell high. And I like it because you're saying,
Yeah.
like, you know what you think, or you know what your tools tell you, but even that sometimes you have to go against that. Why would you go against that in the case of Rhamondre Stevenson?
Yeah, and I mean, I made the tool. So it's like and it's calibrated on, past things that, equal future fantasy points. Like the utilization score is more
Right.
predictive of future fantasy points than fantasy points themselves, which may sound funny, but it's a harder thing to do than you guys realize. Like there's so many stats
Mhm.
you hear people talk about that once you actually go study them, they're like, "Oh, it's interesting, but fantasy points is still way more predictive." So yes, with Rhamondre Stevenson, the utilization score is great. And the utilization score is really looking at the player's complete role, right? Are they getting the carries inside the 5 yard line? Do they have to leave the field when the team is trailing? All those sort of things that can insulate a player from ups and downs in the box score. And he checks all those boxes. Like Rhamondre Stevenson, he has the second highest utilization score in fantasy football right now behind Breece Hall for running backs. But he plays for the Patriots, Sig. And
Mm-hmm.
all I have to do is look at the Patriots depth chart. I think this would be a fun, like, man on the street kind of thing. Like, if you could
Mm-hmm.
leave right now and you could go down to the street and we could keep the show going and you just started randomly finding people. One, ask them if they're a football fan. They have to say yes to that first. So let's assuming they're a football fan and then tell them, name me 3 Patriots wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
How far is anyone getting?
Yeah. Right.
Like they're not getting very far. And then when you really look at the names and you study them, like we don't have much. Maybe Jalen Polk can turn into something, but this is not going to be a high scoring offense. So when you end up in a scenario like that, and you've got a player like Rhamondre Stevenson who's averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game, you just have to know in your heart of hearts that's not staying. Even though the usage is there, like he's probably going to be more of a, you're hoping he can cling on and be like a high end running back too. So now, me saying that, you don't give the guy away. And that's the other thing that's really interesting. We put these pieces out, we give the
Right.
advice, and then I'll get DMs that'll be like, man, I just got X for Rhamondre. And I'm like, that's not selling high. Like selling high, I need to be clear. Like set your expectations high. There are people that have suffered massive running back injuries or injuries to their flex spot. Go find them in your league, sell them on 19.3 fantasy points, Rhamondre Stevenson, and get you a truly something you want back in return. So yeah, with Stevenson right now, this man in the last 2 days, Sigmund has been traded
Mm-hmm.
for Mike Evans DK Metcalf, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. Those are
Yeah.
all names I would trade Rhamondre Stevenson away for today. If you're especially in PPR and half PPR. Standard, obviously, that changes the equation to things. And I'm not saying Rhamondre, again, can't be a solid contributor to your fantasy team and be in your starting lineup. He's just not going to do what he's doing today.
Yeah. I think that, well, look, this will be fun. And I'll just add this as a devil's advocate because, me and the devil, we hanging. And how much, or I'll start here. How how much are you wrestling with or trying to fit into your picture that, man, Dwayne, it does seem like 2024 is going to be the year of the running game in the NFL?
I think that's most likely a blip on the radar. I'm going to be very honest. Like, it's like rolling around in my brain right now. I wanted to get to it this week, but I've got a very full schedule. And then my thought was, I need 3 data points anyway. Like, this could all just be gone after this weekend. So once we get through this week, if we still have this huge thing, this cloud hanging over the NFL passing attacks, I want to go dig more into it. I've already had like the data that I need starting to get pulled and brought to
Mhm.
me because we've got data agreements with different places and we have different ways of pulling that information. So I've already gotten with our guy and been like, okay, here are like the things I need. Like, this is kind of what I want to look at. These are my guesses. But so far, like when I've looked at it at the player level, I haven't really zoomed out to take a look at
Mhm.
it. It's been like a combination of things, right? One, quarterback play is down. It has been for 3 years. Two, we've got pressure rates for some of these teams. These offensive lines, in many cases, are struggling. Some of them are not. Like Bryce Young can't blame his offensive line. His offensive line's actually been pretty good. But there are a lot of teams struggling in the offensive line department. And then there's the obvious bullet point that everyone talks about now, which is the too high safety looks.
Mhm.
And that is increasing. So I've seen a slight increase in that, but I don't know to what extent. The problem is, like last year, we already saw offenses starting to find the counterpunch to those looks. We just haven't seen them early in the season here. Like, and you even heard Patrick Mahomes talk about it when people kept talking about Xavier Worthy getting at and how the deep ball was going to be back. Mahomes settled them all down. He said, guys, he goes, it's not just about like the deep shots. Yes, it's the vertical space that we create with a player like that. But it's also about if you're going to give me a too high look and let me run a crosser with Xavier Worthy and just throw it to him once he passes the linebacker, that is equally effective. And that's how teams have to force defenses to change. They have to create chunk plays when the defense is trying to say, I've got a defense that's taking away chunk plays, with the idea
Right.
of a chunk play being over the top of me. Well, how do you create the chunk plays still whenever the defense, is giving you space in the middle and intermediate range of the field? And we haven't seen the full counterpunch, in my opinion, yet from the offenses right now. The offenses just don't look in sync. If
Right.
it looks like that again this next weekend, I'll be a little bit more concerned. I think there's definitely things there, Sig, but ultimately, I do think that a lot of this settles out. I do. I will say this, like, and we've just seen it. We're already on a 2 to 3 year trend. Passing is down.
Mhm.
Passing yards are down. It's a matter of, is this year like an apocalyptic year, or right? Are we really just kind of
Right.
going to be the same as we have the last 2 years? We're down, but we've kind of already grown accustomed, right? To, okay, this
Right.
is what this means for fantasy football.
Right. Right. The is the trend accelerating?
Right.
And I think you're I think absolutely pointing out, if we look back and we say it indeed was a blip, probably it was because defenses have the advantage early in the season with the preseason
Yes.
not really giving offenses a chance to get on the same page. And it would make sense that some of the pass offenses, like Houston, like we started with, that we expected to be big time pass offenses that aren't yet. Like, those are your buy low opportunities. And then, yeah, sell high could be offenses. Well, with the Patriots, I think, and this is why I brought this up with respect to Rhamondre Stevenson. I mean, he fits in that kind of NFL, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Rhamondre
I
Stevenson fits in the 40 years ago. Go ahead.
Yes. If I had to choose, I would go opposite. I would be trying to buy into the bigger picture of, we probably have a pretty good idea of what passing offenses are going to look like based on the last 2 years, even though they're down. I would probably be going the opposite of the narrative that, okay, we got to go running backs. I would be trying to sell my running backs because of that narrative on an absolute high, and I would be trying to buy wide receivers on a
Right.
low. Now, obviously, that all has to work within the construction of your fantasy roster. You can't just take
Sure.
these pieces of advice, right, and go run with them blindly. You still have to be able to put a team on the field that you feel really good about, which means having players you like at all these different positions. But I think that the best advice I could give right now would be don't overreact.
Yeah, and you're right. The rational reaction to this, assuming this is going to settle back to the mean based on passing efficiency over the last few years, would be to tell your running backs. And we have an overabundance of running backs, and we have a shortage of wide receivers. So I think like you said, those Rhamondre Stevenson trades. Basically, you're saying you get to trade Rhamondre Stevenson for a third or fourth round wide receiver, and he may end up being a third or fourth round running back. But the other thing you brought up, and I don't know what name we could give to this, Dwayne, but it's like the companion to the utilization score. It's the quality of opportunity score, not the amount of opportunity. What is the quality of opportunity? It sounds like that's why you're out on Stevenson. And I think that, I mean, I was with you. I thought they would have the 32nd best offense out of the 32 offenses. But
Yeah.
here's Bryce Young. Hello. Although that's going to change with Andy Dalton. I mean, here's Denver. Denver saying, no, we're the 30
Yeah.
best,
Yeah. Hold my
32nd.
beer.
Yeah, Denver is making New England look like a space age offense, and
Yep.
but they're definitely more competitive, especially if they trade away Matt Judon. They're more competitive than any Cincinnati and Seattle. I mean, those teams aren't slouches. They're more competitive than any of us expected. We could watch them on Thursday, and that's probably the key to the amount, not just the percentages. That's the other thing about the utilization score, or the idea of participation. The participation's great, but Rhamondre Stevenson can still get 70% of the carries, or I like how you also qualified and said the percentage of snaps on pass plays. Because, if actually, we don't want Tank Dell out there on run plays. We
Right.
specifically,
Just
of all
rest.
the players in the NFL,
Don't get hurt.
if he's a 60% snap share, but he's on the field for 87% of pass plays, we're fine. We're just
Yep.
fine with him. And with Stevenson, it's the amount of opportunity as long as the Patriots stay competitive. And that's also another thing you can try to take advantage of, or which teams are surprising us that they're going to revert to the mean of expectations and which ones aren't. Minnesota comes up here, I think. And the last thing I'll say on this whole thing, that, like you said, it's an open question. We're gathering data. Aren't we always gathering data in fantasy football? And we'll see. But there are ways to kind of place a chip on your beliefs with your fantasy football moves. The last thing I'll say here is it's specifically the McShanahan tree offenses: Minnesota, Tampa Bay, right? New Orleans, okay?
Yeah.
That are actually the high efficiency pass offenses. It's
Yep.
so it's not simply run the ball more. You have to have the scheme, you have to have the execution.
Yeah, because everything is based off all of the passing concepts are based off of the idea that a defense in normal down and distance situations, it's completely unpredictable, and they have to be
Right.
ready to defend every square inch
Right.
of the field. And that means getting to your run fits. That means you can't slack off on play action. You have to bite because these teams can run the ball against you. But then once you do, that's whenever they've created that space that they want to get it to their playmakers. And you live in the perfect city to talk about this
Oh
one, and
my
it's the New
gosh.
Orleans Saints.
Yeah.
Like
And
what Clint
look,
Kubiak has done is amazing.
well, and it's in one off season, and it is something to behold, because basically, in a nutshell, you got it. Cecil and I were talking about this on our show earlier this morning. You're just giving the defense a lot to think about on every play. You're putting them in conflict, and you're giving them a lot to think about. And one of the things we talked about on the show earlier today, Dwayne, is you will see the same personnel formation, even the same route combinations, but a completely different choice for defenders, in a way that it's almost designed. I said it's like behaviorism. It's just like scientific method. Like, okay, we ran this play and this is what you did. So now we know the next time we run it, we should do this. The option route will go
Mhm.
this way, or otherwise the quarterback will know, oh, I'm going to catch you on this. Maybe save it for the
Everything is
fourth
setting
quarter.
things up. Everything is
Yes.
about, subterfuge and misdirection and, confusing, and the way I define a really good coordinator in the NFL, in my opinion, are the guys that do what you just said. They give the defense everything on their plate that they have to think about all week, but then they are also doing it right up to the very second that the ball is snapped. And
Right.
that's where motion comes in. That's where right after the snap, play action, creating that extra space on the window to throw it to your receiver, who now also has a step on a defender. And whenever that's Rashid Shaheed, and you're suddenly putting this guy in
Mm-hmm.
motion in ways like what Miami has done. What's funny is you don't have to come up with all these concepts yourself. You can pick and steal from these
Sure.
different schemes and put together a master offense. And over the last 3 years, Sig, for wide
Mm-hmm.
receivers, for example, did you know that for wide receivers in motion at the snap of the football, they have scored 55% more fantasy points, PPR points, than wide receivers not in motion. Play action has been worth a 29% boost to your fantasy score on a per route basis versus non-play action. And then in New Orleans and a lot of these offenses you're talking about, the other thing they do, because they like to run the football, they use a fullback or they're using two tight ends. They're using heavy personnel sets. That often means an additional player on the field that's not a receiver. They are not a threat to earn a target. So now you've got a condensed offense. So if you look at these schemes that have run two wide receiver sets, you can see that there's also a 29% boost in fantasy, or sorry, 28% fantasy point boost in two wide receiver sets versus three, because there's just less target competition in this specific style of offense that has to have a tight end on the field that shows the defense they're willing to run the ball. This guy's a good blocker, is what you're telling them. And I might use him, but I might not. You don't know. So now I'm not just going to let you have a static target. I'm going to go ahead and put Rashid Shaheed in motion. Now you don't know. Do I have a run play called?
Right.
Okay. Am I going to play action out of this and bootleg and hit Rashid Shaheed already full speed, in the flat? And then if you've taken that, like I've got, another route combination coming in behind that. So it's, yeah, Clint Kubiak is absolutely clicking on all cylinders. And I had that wrong. Sorry. Routes with play action is a 26% boost. Two wide receiver sets versus three is a 29%. So I had those flipped. I had
Yeah.
to make sure I clarified
I
that,
got it.
Sig. But
Yeah.
basically, you're hitting on all the things that have been proven to help. And guess what, guys? I know we talk about it in terms of fantasy points, but coordinators want the same thing. They want more yards per play, and they want
Sure.
touchdowns. All those, it all comes back together, even though we're talking about it through a fantasy lens.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why fantasy football, in the time that I've been doing this, fantasy football, I called it the children's table. When Cecil and I started interviewing beat writers, we never even said the word fantasy football. We would ask questions that were obviously about fantasy football to do something actionable with the answer. And now beat writers need to be conversant in fantasy football. Wow, how the worm turns. But I guess based on everything we're talking about here, all of this praise that we're lavishing Clint Kubiak and the New Orleans offense, is the fantasy community underreacting to these developments?
I think so, a little bit. Like if and the best way I know to do it is like I work on my rankings on Wednesdays or on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and I still see Alvin Kamara ranked like, in the mid-teens down towards the 20s by a lot of people. Like, you've lost your mind. Alvin Kamara is a top 10 fantasy player right now. I put him at 6. He's at number 6 in my ranks this week. Actually, he's at number 5. I would start Alvin Kamara right now today over CD Lamb. Like, if you made me choose. Like,
Hmm.
he's in an insane offense, Sig.
Hmm.
And the dude is used on passing downs. He's
Hmm.
used on the run. And just watching him, I've gone back and watched Kamara. I'm like, oh my God, like this guy looks completely rejuvenated.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
old contact balance, nimble footed
yeah.
Alvin Kamara that we grew to love. Does he still have like the long speed? I don't know. We haven't necessarily seen it tested, but you don't have to have that.
No.
And like his target share right now is insane. Again, a highly consolidated offense. The Saints are all about Chris Olave, who's a great, if you weren't going to name Tank Dell, Chris Olave is the name, but people are still smart enough to be clinging to Olave. But Rashid Shaheed, like he's now a low end wide receiver too. You can't wait forever. Like I have a process I put these players through, and it's hard. It makes them move up in steps. But
Hmm.
Rashid Shaheed's gone from being a boom bust wide receiver 4 to being a wide receiver 2 in 2 weeks. Like, and it's because of the way that he's getting used and the fact that we already saw that he was a pretty good player. Like his yards per route run and things like that told us in the past, there might be something here. And that was whenever he was just being told to run gassers all day. So yeah, I think Kamara is underrated right now in fantasy land. I think Rashid Shaheed still needs more respect in the rankings. Olave is the name people have, kind of held on to. So I think most people are smart enough to know, but I think he's probably still being underrated, Sig, because I mean, he had a
Sure.
40% target share last week. If I told you
Hmm.
before this season started that Derek Carr could be a 300 yard per game passing quarterback, which guys, he can. They haven't even had to throw the ball in the second
That's
half
the
of either
that's
game.
the scary thing about this offense. They played one half basically in each game.
Yeah. If I told you Derek Carr could be a 275 to 300 yard passer per game, how high would you rank Chris Olave?
Right. He's a first round pick.
Yes. He's a mid range wide receiver 1 at that
Yeah.
point. And so while I say people have clung to Olave, they're not selling him cheap, but maybe we are still underacting because you should be willing to go pay more.
Right. Right. Every
You should be
trade,
willing to pony up.
Here's
So my
again.
son just came to me, Sig.
Uh-huh.
Answer this
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
My son just came into the room before we started this show, and
Okay.
I told him, "Hey, let's chat about this. Like, it's a good conversation." He goes, "I just got a trade offer. Chris Olave straight up for Jamison Williams. He has JMO.
Oh, I mean, I think that's of course. This is where Adam Harstad would come in too and tell you like the ADP. Like, don't let
Take Chris
that.
Olave."
You take Chris Olave. Well, I think, and that's no slight of Jamison Williams.
Right. We love JMO, and he
We
plays
love
in
Jamison
another
Williams.
offense that we love, Detroit,
Right.
you know?
And that offense also has a lot of room to create more value than it has so far. We sure hope. But
A little more
the,
crowded though, right?
uh,
It's a team that will more willing. They're
yes.
very willing to run the ball, and eventually Sam Laporta is going to emerge. He won't be a nothing all year.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is of the 5 tight ends, the top 5 tight ends, if you got Trey McBride, you're psyched.
Yes.
The other 4 you're not, but I think Laporta is the one where there's a flicker of hope that you're going to get at least 75%
Yeah.
what you expected, and he'll emerge as a top 5 tight end, which is why you drafted him in the top 5. But I'll just make a blanket broad statement about the Saints offense, okay? And we're talking about
Well, I want
Derek
to know where
Carr.
you're ranking Carr.
Well,
I've
I
moved
haven't.
Carr into high end QB2 status. I've got him 10 this week.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If we were drafting today, so look, I'm just going to do rough equivalencies. Okay,
Yeah.
if we're drafting today, Derek Carr should go about where Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott went.
Yeah.
And in fact,
I
you should trade Joe Burrow or Dak Prescott for Derek Carr, right? And this is what I'm going to get. I'll boil it down to this, Dwayne. I think there's a reasonable chance that Derek Carr, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Alvin Kamara, those 4 guys, that 95% of trades where you acquire one of those 4 guys, you are going to win the trade. I don't care how much you overpay for them based on, like you said, Chris Olave had, like, if someone said, oh, did I mess up? I traded Marvin Harrison Jr. for Chris Olave or whatever, some receiver that went ahead of him. I mean, speaking of the Lions, like even if someone came to me and they said like, someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm not saying to bail on Amon-Ra St. Brown, but if
Yeah.
we're looking at everything, then there's plenty of in the range of outcomes where Olave is more valuable than St. Brown, or trading Amon-Ra St. Brown for Alvin Kamara. Talk about going the other direction, because I think Alvin Kamara right now would be like a mid-second round pick. I mean, who are the running backs you're taking over him right now? Robinson, Hall, Barkley, Achan.
I'm not taking Barkley over him. I'd take
Okay,
Kamara. I'd take Kamara over
so
Barkley.
so
He
that's a
doesn't have to
late,
worry about he doesn't have to worry about tush push.
right.
And he catches more balls.
So,
Standard league, I might take Barkley, but most
but
people are playing half PPR, full PPR.
but if you are paying that top 5 running back price, people say that's you're overreacting to what happened. But again, the part that stops me in my tracks is that we've only seen this offense for one half, basically.
Well, and he's still
And
Alvin Kamara, who was good last year. He was
yeah,
not as efficient, but he still scored fantasy points as an inefficient player. Well, now you're telling
sure,
me he's going to be an efficient player and a good offense,
right,
and we don't like that? Like,
right.
I get the injury stuff, right? He's an older player. That would be what would hold him down in a draft today, would be
Mhm.
the concern of age. But as far as me just ranking him on a weekly basis, like, I don't know how you don't have him in your top 6,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
as a ranker. Like, you do you. Anybody, you do your
sure.
thing. But like, I think I think within the next 2 weeks, that's where he'll be. Everyone will be ranking him there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, where is he at right now? That's the thing. It's such low hanging fruit in some ways. I feel like there's something very zen about this idea, Dwayne, which is, and it's funny because when you get down to this stuff, even if you had God level knowledge, there's still the human element. So we never really know what's going to happen. Okay. Which is
Yeah.
part of what keeps us coming back. But just this
Yeah, there's so many
very,
factors.
right.
Yeah.
But just something
Uncontrollable to us.
just just very simply, and I say this so often in the off season, I get people ready. Like the biggest edge you can exploit in fantasy football in this first month of the season is things that you watch and trust your intuition, because your intuition is based on your lifetime of watching football and observing human beings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You watch this and your intuition says, this is not a blip. This is not a fluke. This is the new reality.
This is
Everybody
the
wants
Miami
to.
Dolphins 2 years ago with Mike McDaniel.
Sure. Or
That's what this
the
is.
Michael Vick, Chip Kelly team, or Cam Newton week 1 or whatever. Something where it's so far out of the range of expectations that people say, well, I want to see more evidence before I act on that. That my valuation is going to be splitting the difference between what I'm seeing and what I thought was going to happen. And in some of the cases, like we're talking about the Houston Texans or maybe the Detroit Lions offense, or some of these things, like there is going to be that regression. But when you can't come up with a reason, that's the sort of intellectual test here,
Yeah.
Dwayne.
And I think
Why would this offense suddenly turn back into a mediocre offense? I can't
like,
come
and
up
we
with a
if we
reason.
we have the opposite stance on the Patriots, right? So you have to be thoughtful,
Yeah,
in this stuff. But whenever you look at the elements that are driving this offense, they're things that have actually been sustainable. Like
right.
these are the cheat codes in fantasy land. Motion, play action. They're the cheat codes in football. Let's forget the word fantasy. Those are cheat codes in football.
Yeah,
It's not going away. Those
yeah,
things are going to continue to be, fruitful for the teams that know how to deploy them and know how to sequence the play calls and all that. And then the second component you have to look at is, okay, let's think of the talent. Chris Olave, we know, is a talented player. He's playing in a talented offense. So it's not like this is, some player we expected out of nowhere that had never been a target earner and had just been, like a Van Jefferson or something. Van
right,
Jefferson, he's the
right.
wider, he's
Crispin Jackson.
scoring 18 points a game, and they're all just like deep bombs. Like, no, the context of everything comes together. Rashid Shaheed was already a player that was in that wide receiver 4 or 5 conversation because he had flashed talent. Well, now he's showing us the talent was for real, and he has a coordinator that knows how to use it. Derek Carr has supported multiple top 24, wide receivers on the same team in the past. So he's shown us that he has a ceiling as a passer. Nothing this high, but he's shown us. And he's a guy.
Yeah,
This is the perfect scheme for him.
exactly.
Setback,
Well, that's it.
process,
Right,
use anticipation, use
right.
like what all you've learned through your career. And he's an accurate passer. This is a perfect scheme for Derek Carr.
Yeah, that's the main thing. That's Dwayne, that's why I'm willing to buy or overpay by what the price would be for some of these players right now, because he looks like he's just a flawless extension of Clint Kubiak on the field. And he understands the why of the conception of the plays, and
And he
he's
was giddy about it before the
yeah,
season started. He goes, I
yeah,
think you guys are going to like what we're about to show you.
right. Yeah,
He knew.
pay
He knew
attention,
what
we'll
was
see.
about to happen.
Yeah, and I do, and this, and another reason why I'm so bullish, why I'm telling people, if you're listening to this right now, if you're watching this, go try to trade for one of these New Orleans Saints, is because I think Vic Fangio is not going to know, like an offensive scheme that punishes over aggressive defenses, playing Vic Fangio. Okay, let's, and I'd love. I think just again, the larger conversation is things that are happening that we say this is the new reality, but there are people out there that want, and it can be negative too. I need more evidence. Let's touch on a few key issues of the moment. Is the answer to the Kansas City running back pickup? Is it Carson Steele? Is it Samaje Perine? Or is it Brewster's Millions? None of the above.
I think it's Brewster's Millions. I think we're probably going to end up with something similar to what we're dealing with in Dallas, like this Rico Dowdle Zeke thing. It's like, yeah, they both get to play, but do I ever really feel good about starting them in fantasy? No. If I had to choose, Sig, I would go with P. Ryan. My projection would be that people are going to like Carson Steele slightly better in the first week because he's been the guy getting the carries whenever we haven't had Pacheco out there.
And he
So I
has a
think
pet
he's the most
alligator. And he
likely.
has a pet alligator.
Yes, and he has a pet alligator. So I think he's the favorite to step into the early down work. Here's the problem. The Chiefs, have shown us in the past they're willing just to be a pass first team. They've also been a team that have been able to show us that, we can do running game things without running the ball. And they still have a toy they're really not playing with that much yet with Xavier Worthy that they could put in motion more. They could get we already saw the one rushing touchdown from him. Obviously, you're not going to give him a ton of work like that, but you could give him screens, bubbles. Rashee Rice is obviously, someone you use around the line of scrimmage. Travis Kelce catching shuttle passes, at the 1 yard line. We've just seen this stuff so much from the Chiefs. So they're going to be a pass first offense. I think you're going to see more passing whenever they're down inside the 5 yard line. It's like, okay, I can have this ball in Patrick Mahomes' hands, or I can hand it to Carson Steele.
Right.
It was already a tough decision when you had Pacheco. Well, now it's just going to be Patrick Mahomes. And if not, he might just call his own number, even if Andy Reid does. So
Right.
I will say this, though. Like, I would pick P. Ryan to have the most value if everything went your way, because he's shown us he can play on pass downs, and they're already using him that way. So if Carson Steele came out and fumbled on the first play and Andy Reid got mad at him, which Andy Reid's actually been kind of forgiving in that nature, but let's say Andy Reid got mad and benched Carson Steele, I think you would get more out of Samaje Perine than if Andy Reid got mad at Perine, right, and benched him, because I don't think they're going to put Carson Steele out there for all the passing down work. So most contingent upside, if you will, I think is Perine. He's the guy that could end up as a 3-down back. Week 1 value, right after this happens, I think Carson Steele is the guy that you would rather have in your fantasy lineup.
Yeah, I like that you led with Dallas, though. Just think Dallas, like none of the above.
And that's
It's
an
gonna be
offense we like, just like
right,
the Chiefs. We like it.
right,
So
right. Although I want to going back to the point about what we expected and what we're seeing and wanting more evidence. Kansas City's offense wasn't that good last year, and they bring in Hollywood Brown. They do add Xavier Worthy. Okay, they add Xavier Worthy. They've lost Isaiah Pacheco, who's a very important part of this offense. Could it just be that Kansas City's offense is going to be middle of the road again? Like trade classic sell. I do buy low, sell high every week, but the best moves are the sell low, buy highs. Like New Orleans offense, buy high. Patrick Mahomes, sell low.
Man, so it is an interesting question, because I do think like the fulcrum point for everything with Kansas City is in a very unknown entity, and it's Xavier Worthy. If Xavier Worthy can turn into the X factor that they hope he can one day be right now, I think the Chiefs will be an absolute explosive offense. If he can't, and Cambritt Taylor called him out before the game.
Yeah.
Cambritt Taylor said, this dude is just out here running wind sprints. He's not a route runner. I'm going to shut him down. Didn't only shut him down, he had an Odell Beckham Jr. style pick, just a one-handed snare.
Put it in the
Cambritt
Louvre.
Taylor, wow. Wow. Sorry, Joe, but he's a badass. I have to say ass. Sorry.
Yes.
That was just an amazing play. So Worthy is the factor. Now, here's what I'll say. Like, it's not just, Xavier Worthy like has to go win and do his thing, Sig, but we are talking about a coordinator in Andy Reid that could unlock him further without him having to make huge progressions. Like, you could put him in motion more. You could get him more of this jet stuff. You could get him behind the line of scrimmage looks, but ultimately, to truly unlock the offense, teams need to respect the fact that he could blow you away at any second. And like we saw that in the preseason, haven't seen it in the first 2 weeks. So I think it really comes down to that. If he doesn't take a massive step forward, then it's funny. I have not asked myself this question, and I'm just maybe I'm trying to stay positive about Xavier Worthy. But if he does not take a step forward, then I think that the Chiefs are going to underwhelm, and you will have overpaid for Patrick Mahomes. I think you're going to love Rashee Rice.
Yeah,
I think
that's
Rashee
almost
Rice
better for Rashee Rice, actually. That's when
Rashee Rice was the steal of fantasy
year.
drafts. Like, knowing what we knew when we drafted, right? He was the absolute, like, you know me, I draft a ton of high stakes teams. He's on half of them. Like, he was the guy that every time it got to round 3 or 4, I'm like, Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice. So he's fine. He's a wide receiver 1. Like, he's a wide receiver 1. Like, and Kelsey's going to be fine. He's not what he used to be. He's going to be fine. But I do think the Chiefs would underwhelm if Xavier Worthy does not make a massive step forward.
Yeah, this is one. And unfortunately, from a fantasy standpoint, their defense is good enough that they don't need to push the envelope of the offense. And the other thing that strikes me, Dwayne, is in your mind's eye, picture what the Kansas City Chargers, Kansas City Raiders, Kansas City Broncos games are going to go like this year. Like, what kind of game scripts, what kind of games are those going to turn into? Are they going to turn into offensive firepower shows? Really?
No, I feel you. Raiders have impressed me a little bit. Like,
I think Zamir White's a buy low. Speaking of buy lows, I think Zamir White's a buy low for the same reason that Rhamondre Stevenson has been so good. If the Raiders are competitive, Zamir White, his utilization, right? He was on the field 60+% of the time. He's actually catching more passes than Alexander Madison. I know Madison's been getting the touchdowns, but if the Raiders are a solid competitive team, Zamir White's going to go off one of these weeks just because they're facing a team that, like the Colts, that can't stop the run.
Yes. So I'm not a huge Zamir White guy, but I did write Zamir White up in my rankings article, which drops tomorrow, Rankings Risers. Like, he's got the trifecta. So like, if you're wanting to buy on him and you're wanting a shot at it, like you need to do it now, because I think he's probably scoring 15 to 20 fantasy points this weekend. But like,
exactly,
one, it's what you mentioned. His snap share went to 65% in week 2. He had a 53% route participation rate, which, guys, that's good. Like, elite is like 60% plus. But if you're in the
Which
50s,
nobody had that in his profile. Nobody, not one person had that potentially in his
yeah,
profile.
nobody knew that he could stay out there. Now, the first week, it was more Madison. So sometimes these things can come down to the way the drives worked out, who got the
Right.
longer drive versus who went out there on the 3 and out. And then the next drive, the coach is like, oh, yeah, the other guy's in. You're like, wait, I just got 3 plays. But the utilization was number one. Like, the second part of the trifecta is the fact that the Raiders' passing attack looks pretty good, and defenses are probably going to have to now make a decision that we should probably stop Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams and let this team, and that's going to mean less
Yep.
attention on the run game for the Raiders, which going into the season, that was a big focal point because they know that Antonio Pierce wants to run the football. And the idea also being that if we can take away the run early, what's Gardner Minshew without play action? What's Gardner Minshew without the threat of the run? Well, Gardner Minshew's come out and said, well, we haven't been in really good running game scripts and our run game has sucked and I'm still throwing the ball. So I think that works in his favor. And then the final thing is the other thing you mentioned. You're playing against a team it's giving up 200 yards per game in the Panthers, and you're 6-point favorites. Like, so, I mean, we're looking at Zamir White's going to have 15 to 18 touches this weekend. So, like, this is the weekend that he's gonna do his thing. And if you want to buy him, like, you got to. And guys, buy low. When we say buy low, buy low. I don't want you to DM me and show me your trade where you sent Chris Olave for Zamir White.
Right.
Okay, I don't send me that DM. I can't respond. I can't take it.
Right. Trade like Hunter Henry for Zamir White. Or
Yes. Yes.
something like
Sid,
that.
for clarifying. That's a really good
Yeah.
pull.
Yeah. So, again, the theme being stuff that we're watching, and the Raiders are competitive. Surprise, surprise. But what are the implications of that? The implications of that is there's still some good games to come for Zamir White. And I mean, just looking over some of these, let's do like a quick lightning round. All right. I just want to I'm just going to do like, will the blank stay blank? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Will the Bears pass offense stay bad?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I mean, at least
I think it has to get better because it can't be worse. You want lightning round though, so I'm not going to go super far into it. The problem is Shane Waldron and the injuries.
exactly.
Rome Odunze is hurt. Out there playing on an MCL sprain. You didn't have Keenan Allen. So this offense could change, but it's not going to flip the switch overnight. Shane Waldron is the opposite of Clint Kubiak.
Yeah, I agree with that. Is the Arizona offense going to look like one of the best offenses in the NFL?
I think it will be an above average offense. You definitely have the weapons to make it work, and I like the scheme, but I still worry a little bit. I think Kyler is an above average quarterback, but not the type of quarterback that probably takes this thing all the way, to being an elite offense.
That's fair. I mean, some of it is just the Rams. So is it for the Rams? Are we talking offensive collapse, or is there something there in the rubble?
No. Cut Matthew Stafford. You downgrade Kyron Williams. Like, you can't do anything until you get Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back. You got to get at least one of them back. Then you got hope, right? So I mean, if you're Sean McVay, it's just trying to figure out how to win with small ball. How do I keep something? How do I somehow get a game to a field goal in the fourth quarter? Like, that's all you're hoping to do. Otherwise, fantasy, man. Jordan Whittington, maybe. Like, again, didn't play enough last week, but if I had to pick someone, like, we know who Demarcus Robinson is. We know who Tyler Johnson is. If someone were to surprise us on the roster, I feel like it would have to be him.
Yeah, Whittington's fascinating to me just because they love him. He's going to get the Cooper Kupp role. He seems to be engineered for it, and you never know. But the offensive line is also in major. They ran out of injured reserve spots.
Their offensive linemen are actually, it's going to be maybe the healthiest that it's been. I know they lost players, but they're also getting back a starting tackle.
Right, that was on suspension.
Yeah. So I think their offensive line is neutral at worst case, even though they've had the injuries to Noteboom and the guard they drafted out of TCU. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. Whittington's fascinating, but I mean, it's enough that people have speculated, could Matthew Stafford get traded? It's basically a walk year for him, because it's not going to be anything good for the Rams. Will the blank stay blank? On the subject of the Rams, really quick, Miami without Tua. Two layers to this. One is how bad is it going to be? How much do we trust Mike McDaniel to make some chicken salad? And also, how do you forecast the window for this? What do we do? I know we're talking about a player's career, player's well-being.
Yeah.
It's gross. Fantasy football is gross, really. But hey, we get to do it as a job. So, and you all get to, and you all indulge us. Let us do it. So let's do it right here with Miami. Is it again? Is it kind of like the opposite of my New Orleans take? Is it possible, Dwayne, that every trade where you're trading away Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devin Achane, as long as in the rational range, even if you're the bottom end of that, even if you're not getting enough by what most people think, you're still going to win that trade.
Yeah, I'm willing to move all those players just because of the uncertainty. I respect whatever decision Tua needs to make, right? If he wants to come back and play and he wants to earn the money, great. I understand it. If he wants to retire, I understand it. Apparently, it sounds like that's not on the table, but it could also be out of his hands. They just might not clear him. So no, as much as I love Mike McDaniel, like Skylar Thompson, and we love Matt Waldman in the RSP. Shout out Matt. Like he called Skylar Thompson, one of the most underrated quarterbacks, 3 years ago. Like, and he really liked Skylar Thompson. So there's obviously some tools there, but I just don't think there's enough right now based on, what I've seen. Now the guy's going to obviously get more practice. They're going to get to scheme him up to do the things he likes. So we know Mike McDaniel's going to be able to do some things, Sig, but it's a massive downgrade. I mean, I'm just looking at my ranks this week and I've got Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 12. I mean, Tyreek Hill never grades as your wide receiver 12. No, he does this week. I mean, so
well,
that's a low end wide receiver 1.
And he's not going to finish as wide receiver 12. Probably not even anywhere near wide receiver 12. What like ranking?
Yeah, I mean,
him
I may
wide,
be
and,
being too. I could be being too nice. Now he's been pretty good in the games without Tua. Like he's averaged over 90 yards. He just doesn't score touchdowns.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm basing him. But I'm with you. I'm like looking at him in my ranks. I've got him 1 ahead of Chris Olave. I could take Chris Olave. I've got him 1 ahead of Devonta Smith. Smith is closer. Like he's really in a good spot right now because AJ Brown is out and he's getting all the targets. What about Chris Godwin? Playing in the slot. Talk about another scheme savant.
It's a legitimate question. If you said, would you rather have Chris Godwin or Amon-Ra St. Brown? I don't mean to pick on Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm just saying, like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, Chris Godwin, they're all basically, Cooper Kupp was like the supercharged version of this for 1 week. They're all basically the same thing where they're the layup target in their offense and they're really good at being that guy. So, again, if in a potential year of passing futility and then the resurgence of the run, it's those guys in the slot that can get those layup targets that are going to really pull Devontae Smith, that are really going to pull away from the pack. So yeah, absolutely. Chris Godwin belongs in this conversation of players that you might, again, Chris Godwin.
So how low are you on Tyreek Hill? Like rest of season, you probably don't have it in front of you, but
that's what I'm saying,
where
right?
are you placing him?
I would trade him for Chris Godwin.
Just make the move now.
Well, here's the thing. Again, and look, everybody, you do what you want with this, but all of these, like I'm with you, Dwayne. I have to do my projections today, and I look over my projections and I say, am I really saying start this player over this player? And with Tyreek Hill, it's going to be hard because you're going to say, am I really telling somebody to start this player? I mean, just looking off the top of my head, I'm trying to find a good one. Like I'll give you an example here. Like George Pickens and Tyreek Hill have a similar range of outcomes this week. Maybe Tyreek Hill gets a little more volume, but if someone said, I'm going to start George Pickens over Tyreek Hill, am I crazy? No, you're not crazy. No, you're not crazy. So, but we have to split the difference because we know this comes kind of back to perception, right? I mean, the doing the job that we do, if we say, I mean, if Tyreek Hill's wide receiver 30 this week, it's probably not going to be because passing's been so bad. But I mean, I'll give you here's a great example, right? If someone said I have to, the only way I can get Rashid Shaheed in my lineup is bench Tyreek Hill. Bench Tyreek Hill. I mean, Rashid Shaheed's been doing what we wanted Hill to do.
Yeah.
Right? It sounds crazy today, but if it happens for 1 more week, it's not going to sound
so crazy. If Skylar
Thompson
comes out and he kills it in his first game, then you can readjust.
Yeah. But so I just think that there's a big gap here of like, ooh, is it really going to be that different? Or otherwise, underreacting to things that seem like big changes, because we always want to say, well, everything's going to go towards the mean, but we don't know. Chase Stewart always said, like, we don't know where that mean actually is. There's a new mean for the Rams offense. There's a new mean for the Miami offense. We're talking about New Orleans. There's a new mean. Maybe it's higher than people think, right? There's a new mean for the Minnesota offense. I mean, maybe there's a take here that's like, go get Aaron Jones. He's going to go off one of these days when they're not in a game against
Sam
Minnesota.
Darnold's right there with Derek Carr.
Yeah, and Baker Mayfield
I
in
mean, yeah.
Tampa. I mean, I was saying recently on my show that we shouldn't just say the name of a quarterback, Dwayne. We should say quarterback plus play caller. I mean, it should just be like we're not taking
Plus weapons.
Derek Carr, right? Now you're getting into like even more context matters, right? I remember seeing that go by on my timeline, and I think that again the takeaway here is that what you're looking for right now are the quarterbacks that seem to be really in alignment with their play callers. And then that's going to increase the value of everybody. And those are the offenses that you want to be investing in right now. All right. Well, we're going to go off the rails, though. I got to ask you first because
I'm terrible at rapid fire, so you can blame me.
oh no, it's fine. It's good. I mean, everybody
Because
knows.
context matters.
Yeah, well, because we're on the couch. We're relaxed. We're here to let things
Relaxed.
breathe, right?
I might fall
First,
asleep.
and that's okay. I mean, nap time is great. The older I get, the more I like taking naps. I need them. Okay, you mentioned your son coming in and asking you about
Yep.
a trade offer, right? So give me if you can a moment where like parenting and fantasy football advice kind of collided, or otherwise, how is it having your son as a budding fantasy football player in your house?
Well, I love it. Because he's into what like I'm working on and doing, so I
Sure,
have plenty to talk. I have a topic I can talk with him about. So I mean, he just
sure.
graduated college. He's back here at the house. He's looking for a job right now, so it's a great connection point. For us, that's the number one thing. And
Is
if you
he
think about
different?
it,
Is he a different kind of fantasy football player than you?
he has similarities, but he's pretty analytical. Like, so he digs into things. He looks at all sides of things. So like the best way I use fantasy football is like, we have different political leanings. I won't get into all of that, but like I use that. I'm like, okay, so for fantasy, like you think about this, this, and this. Have you thought about like all the angles of like this political issue? And I'm not even talking just candidates. I'm talking about just different
Sure,
political issues and stuff
sure.
that so it is fun because like you can kind of use it like as a parallel right through these conversations that you're having. But the biggest thing is just I have this great way that's easy to connect. And if you think about when I first got into fantasy football, one, I just love football. Why did I love football? Because my dad. I
Exactly.
got
That's
into
why
it with
all
my
of us
dad. I
boys
hung out
got
with
into
my
sports.
dad
Yeah.
every weekend. It was that bonding moment with him where like I got to sit there and learn from him. And eventually I had a voice in the conversation and he listened to me and like, and we had this team, like the Cowboys that we love together. And then so now like my kids are not as into the Cowboys because there's so many things fighting for their time today over sports
Mhm.
teams, but Camden likes fantasy. So really gives us this thing. And I did have a super proud dad moment. We had like a 1 hour strategy conversation before his draft, and he executed it flawlessly. Like I posted it on Twitter, and like it got. I just thought it would be like I was just posting out there for fun, like proud dad moment. Drafted a
Sure.
really good team, and it kind of went crazy. Like how many people were liking and commenting on it, but like he executed the strategy flawlessly, and he's got a really good team.
That's awesome. Proud dad. Yeah. And I've brought this up a lot, but absolutely sports, American sports fandom, a lot of it is about bonding with father figures,
Yes.
uh, patriarchs, and
You
it's
want your
ways.
hobbies to bring you closer to at least for me, like, you do what you
Yeah.
want with your hobbies. I want my hobbies to ultimately bring me closer to friends and other people, like, whether that's
Yeah.
playing poker and hanging out or, like, I like to play the guitar. Well, I like to play guitar by myself, it's a great way to recharge, but when I get to go hang out with my friends and play, and we're all hanging out together, and it creates this way for us to connect, like, that's where, like, what you said earlier, the force multiplier, like,
Uh-huh.
that's the part I love, and
Yeah.
I sometimes in our roles that we do, and I love what I get to do, but I do sometimes lose sight of that with fantasy because now it is, you're trying to do the best you can to give people really good content that can help them win their league. But sometimes you work so hard on it, you lose like that connection with your league mates and stuff.
Hmm.
Cause I
Hmm.
get to a point where I don't want to talk about it sometimes. Not that I don't
Sure.
like it, but your brain needs a way, your brain has to
Right.
take breaks from things in order to come back to it fresh and actually be really good at what you're doing. So I've been trying to be much more intentional just about fantasy period, like and how it like connects me to whether it's my friends, whether it's my son, whatever.
Yeah, it's great. You get that extra added benefit. I mean, it's about connections, shared experience. NFL is like one of the last shared experiences in American culture. You talk about
See, I remember
politics. Yeah.
fantasy drafts from 15, 20 years ago, I can remember what people are wearing and stuff.
Nah,
Like, it was
it's
such a
big.
cool, like,
It's just
moment, like
it's well,
yeah.
everything is right in the world when you're in that suspension of
Yeah,
draft. All possibilities are in play. You're with people that you like. You're learning about yourself. You're learning about each other, and you're setting in motion a whole bunch of fun things that are going to happen in the future, and a bunch of moments. And absolutely, I think that it's still about bonding. And just really quickly, I just want to touch on this thing about
sure.
again as a boy who I mean, what my dad did, may he rest in peace. That we did as our tradition is every year we would meet up at a different baseball stadium, see the Pirates, and it's again sports. But as a kid, when you're talking of sports with your dad, they really see and hear you. You know, they really are
Mm.
noticing you in a way, especially if you're in a family with like more than one kid. So it is that handshake. Okay, you mentioned playing your guitar. I got to ask, who's your or one of your guitar heroes?
A guitar hero. Well, I'm more, like, into the singer-songwriters.
Well, sure. Well, that's fine.
Yeah, well,
Towns
so
Van Zant.
I love Towns Van Zant, but, like, the guy right now that, like, I just think is amazing, and one of the best songwriters ever, one of the best guitar players, like, on the planet, like, is Jason Isbell.
Mm, mhm.
I can't get enough. Like, the songwriting is so good, it's so thoughtful, the music is so amazing. His live shows, got to go see him at Red Rocks. That was
Mm.
awesome. Did that this, I don't know, this
Your
summer,
first time at Red
it's
Rocks?
first time to go see a show there. I had visited and checked it out before, like, when I was in Colorado hanging out with a buddy, but,
Uh-huh.
traveled a few different places to go see him now. Just got to see him again a few weeks ago here in Dallas at the Majestic. He's just,
Ooh,
an amazing talent, man. Just
yeah.
everything. Everything is so tight. Every time you go to see him, like, doesn't matter what you pay, you're just like, "That was worth it."
Yeah, no, live music. I mean, I can wax rhapsodic about live music longer than I can about football, because but Red Rock. Everyone should see a concert at Red Rock. Everyone should see one concert at Red Rocks and one concert at the Gorge out in Eastern Washington. Those are
Yeah, that's on the
truly
bucket list. I have not been there, but
un. We
me and my buddies wanna try to time up the right artist there.
Yeah, had some nights at Red Rocks to remember, and some that I can't remember, but and certainly the gorge. You can camp out at the gorge too, which is whew, and that's out there by the Hanford, like where the nuclear waste is. There's all kinds of urban legends about lizard people out there and stuff like that, which is awesome whenever you're there for fish shows and you're in your 20s. I'll just leave it at that. I guess
We
um,
know what goes along with that, Sig.
right? All well, I mean, altering your consciousness is something that everybody needs to do, and even if you just do it by spinning around and getting dizzy. Um, I I I want to ask you real quick because I don't know if I brought this up on the show. This is a shirt that Joe Bryant sent me, "Hands on a Hard Body." And you're a Texan. I had lived in Texas for 20 years. Do you know about Hands on a Hard Body?
No.
Okay, this is great. I'm going to educate you and everybody else. It's a great documentary. Trey Anastasio from Fish. Here's a connection to Fish. He actually did a musical. He was part of a musical they made out of it. So down in Longview, they had a contest where they had a truck, and they picked 24 people's name at random, and the contest was keep your hand on the truck. Whoever keeps their hand on the truck the longest wins the truck. And the contest would go like 4 or 5 days. They had breaks and there were some things, but basically it was like a sleep deprivation
So you
contest,
just have to
basically.
keep your hand on the vehicle.
Right, and not really. So there's a film, there's a documentary about this from the '90s that is just. If this sounds interesting to you folks, trust me, it's a good documentary because you meet all the people, you see what the contest is really about. It sounds so simple, but like life, nothing is actually simple. It's a great look into Texas, East Texas culture, and it really has stayed with me. I mean, I should start a podcast on documentary films and the documentary films that have touched me. But this is one that, especially for any Texan, Dwayne. I mean, what are the essential Texas movies, right? Like Giant, right? Bernie. Did you see Bernie, the one with Jack Black? The
Yes.
one,
Yeah, I've seen Bernie.
that's an
Yeah, Bernie is
that's an
really good.
essential.
Yes.
That's an
Yeah, it's very
essential
good.
Texas movie. You want to understand Texas? That's a good movie to start understand Texas. And if you want to understand fantasy football, fantasy life, Dwain McFarland, longtime friend of the show. Hey, but I don't say just a quick moment. I got to sign off, but I want to say congratulations, man. I mean, like you've done this and you set out to do it and you did it and it's happened so fast and we're all richer for it. And it's awesome to get to spend time with you. It's awesome to get to spend time with all of our friends in the fantasy football world, the friends we make along the way. We love you because you're so very classy.